Good afternoon and welcome to today's AdWeek webinar, where we will be looking at curated marketplaces and dynamic PMPs and really understand whether these are the future of media trading. And our webinar today is being sponsored by Cognitive. I'm Stuart File, Vice President of Branded Content at AdWeek, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Before we begin, I just want to take a few minutes here and do your standard pre-webinar housekeeping, just let you know what to expect from our event and also make sure that you understand all the features of our webinar platform. Our presentation today should go somewhere in the 30 to 35 minute range. It's going to be, there are some slides, but it's going to be mostly conversational between our two speakers. And after we're done with that presentation, we are going to have plenty of time for audience questions. So I just want to invite everyone, if you do have a question for our speakers at any point during today's presentation, just simply use the question tool that you should see there on your screen. It's probably right underneath the video window where you're seeing me right now, and use that to submit your questions, and we're going to get to as many of them as we can following our live presentation. It is not too late to invite your colleagues to come and join us today, and we'd love it if they would. To make that easy for you, again, when we sent you a final reminder email for today's webinar, we included a link over to the registration page. So find that email, grab that link, send it off to your colleagues. They still have plenty of time to come on in, register, and join us live. But if they can't make it live, they still can register. Because today, and catch the webinar, because webinars will be recorded, and we're going to send you a link to that on-demand version later this afternoon. So if you check your email about 3:30, 4 o'clock Eastern time, you should get that link over to the on-demand version. As I mentioned, we do have some slides today. They're not, it's not a huge slide deck, but we do always like to make the slides available to you if you want them as a takeaway from today's event. And you can find that PDF of today's deck right now in the event resources area. You should see that tab on your screen near where you see the question tool. Lastly, I just want to remind everyone to please check out the AdWeek webinar calendar. www.adweek.com/webinars. I know we're in December and we're winding up the year, but we still have another week's worth of webinars next week. We've got 3 of them on our calendar. More importantly, actually either today or tomorrow, we're going to start posting all the webinars for January 2022. And we are all set to be doing about 3 webinars every week through the month of January. And really through the first quarter, as I was just looking at our calendar coming up. So those are going to be up on our webinar calendar shortly. So if you don't see them now, return, you'll go there, sign up for an upcoming webinar. Just as important, check out our entire archive of on-demand webinars. Every webinar we've done over the past year, that's 150 of them plus in total, including a few from our sponsors today at Cognitive. So as we think about today's webinar, let me just take a moment here and introduce our speakers. From Cognitive, we're very happy again to be joined by Jeremy Fain. Jeremy is the CEO and is a co-founder of Cognitive. Again, if you're not familiar with Cognitive, it does offer a self-learning, fully automated neural network technology for marketers. And again, Jeremy previously led North American accounts for Rubicon Project, but again, he's been now Cognitive for, what we were just saying, probably about 6-7 years. Our guest speaker today joining Jeremy is Ben Neen. Ben's Senior Director of Product Management over at Xandr, where he leads the product team for Xandr Curate and the deals capability for Xandr Monetize. He's been with Xandr since 2015 when it acquired YieldX, which was a forecasting technology that's used for digital publishers, where again, Ben was over there where he led client consulting. So without further ado here, let me go in and bring Jeremy and Ben up on screen to begin today's webinar. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks.
Ben, it's good to see you. It's been
you too, Jeremy.
It's been a few years because of COVID, but it's really nice to see you, and it's been really nice to prep for this. Ben and I have known each other for 16 years now, basically since the beginning that both of us were in the industry. Back at the old IAB, we were just reminiscing before the call, the Greg Stewart days, the beginning, the first real iteration of the IAB. That was a long time ago, and look at us now. We're still in the industry. Yeah, we're still in the industry even after all that. So thank you everybody for joining today, and I just wanted to bring you quickly through what we're going to cover. Mostly it's going to be really a fireside chat discussion. We're going to have some slides as discussion openers, but really we want to talk about this idea of what a curated marketplace is, and it's really the next evolution of the deal ID, the PMP, the private marketplace. And it's really enabling a lot of new innovation in the space. So we thought it'd be really educational to talk through how it came about, how curated marketplaces came about, because Xander and Ben specifically have really been the ones that have created this new opportunity and this new use of the PMP. So I thought it'd be great for Ben to join us. And of course, Cognitive is taking advantage of this new capability within the PMP. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that innovation came about also. So today, hopefully, we're going to learn a lot about what a curated marketplace is, and hopefully it'll be educational for everybody. So why don't we just jump right into it? Ben, tell us what a curated marketplace is.
Yeah, curated marketplace. It's, simply it's a marketplace within a marketplace, and it's built to solve a specific problem or deliver a particular value within the broader marketplace. A lot of times we actually use a, analogy for like the food system to help people understand it. So, you've got this enormous global food chain and supply ecosystem that covers every kind of ingredient for every sort of market. But then you've also got, organic markets, you've got specialty butcher shops, you've got, everything from Whole Foods to Safeway. There's a sort of a broad range of businesses within the global food system that are trying to solve a particular problem for a particular kind of customer. And that's really the same idea with the curated marketplace. And as you mentioned, it's really the next iteration of the deal ID, practically or technically speaking. All this gets mechanized through a deal ID. So it's a way for, a lot of different types of companies in the industry to take control of the supply marketplace and add their own special sauce and merchandise all that to buyers through deal IDs.
All right, so let's talk about, look, the deal ID has been around for a long time, the private marketplace, and it's evolved several times since its invention to really just help. So for instance, when I was at CBS Interactive, we used deal IDs because we were obscuring inventory that was really valuable to us. We didn't want people to just be able to buy mobile intenders off of the mobile review site. We wanted them to just be able to buy CNET, for instance, but through a deal ID, they could buy the mobile content. That was sort of the beginning of the deal ID and the PMP. But that was over 10 years ago. Then there was programmatic guaranteed and all these other things. So what brought about this idea of your iteration of the PMP, this curated marketplace? Xander Specific's product is called Curate. You're the product manager. What brought about the idea that you needed the next evolution? And what is it exactly? And how is it different?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And it starts with maybe a little bit of embarrassment, honestly, because, the very reason we built the Curate platform to begin with and kind of had this idea of curated marketplaces, obviously the idea of like a multi-seller deal ID had existed for a long time, but it was like really like a hacked up kind of thing that, we knew exchanges did on sort of a minor basis. But when AT&T acquired AppNexus, it sort of had this vision to marry a bunch of data with, lots of video supply in the market, kind of create this special network that we were going to call community. And we needed an underlying tech mechanism to sort of pool all this inventory together from all the sellers that we had on the platform. put data on top of it and then sort of, be able to operationally run that business. So we built essentially the skeleton of Xandr Curate then. That was early 2019. The community network did not go well for Xandr for a variety of reasons, but it sort of ended up being a lot harder to access CTV supply than maybe we realized. It was a lot more difficult to clear some of the identity challenges at that time with the tech we had. And that marketplace didn't go well. But what we realized we had is we had built this really powerful capability, and we started to use it to, just solve the problem for a lot of buyers out there, which was it's just really painful and inconvenient to access deal-gated supply, especially with, video and CTV in particular. So we started to use it to essentially aggregate, lots and lots of deal-gated supply across all of our sellers, and then make it really easy for traders to access that on our DSP Xandr Invest. And then we sort of realized it's sort of like an app store with the Apple situation, right? Whereas like, hey, actually probably most of the value is in letting other people bring their own, operational expertise, data expertise, what have you to the table. We aren't running a managed service media buying platform. Like we don't have that background. So we started to give it to customers, and we at the same time we had a lot of customers coming and asking us for help to solve various challenges. And as soon as we gave it to a handful of customers, it just really seemed to take off. And I think what we had found is we had the right tech in place to make it really operationally simple to create these deals. And we had a huge network of supply. And we had also done a lot of the work to find a way to make all this deal-gated, really high-value video supply available to all these third-party curators as well. So it just sort of grew from there, I would say.
Yeah, and during the cookie apocalypse and all of that leading up to what we thought was going to be this year, did you see a lot of your publishers trying to figure out how to monetize their audiences off their properties?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting you say it, because in a lot of ways, the curated marketplace is also sort of like the future of audience extension. Like sellers have run these audience extension models where they've basically put their like a private trading desk kind of team together where they white label some DSP technology. They put their data in it. They sell on an IO basis. And they try and, capture some sort of margin and sell media products effectively that combine exchange inventory with their own data. So yeah, sellers were interested in that. I actually think, we've seen a lot of growth from like contextual providers in the market, so anyone with cookie-less data has seen, I think, a lot more interest lately than people who have been sort of dependent on cookies. And then the people who have been dependent on cookies really are coming to ask us for help on like, well, hey, what can I do? How do I solve this identity issue? How do I, continue to stay in the market, despite all these challenges? So some of those things kind of together, I think, often lead us to suggest a curated marketplace, because it lets them, I would say, work with a lot of different tech in a way that doesn't expose that complexity to their buyer. They can kind of like solve that, or we as the exchange can kind of solve that for them. And they don't have to worry about their buyer having to like do some sort of special integration or, sign with a bunch of tech providers. It's been sort of it's like an abstraction layer that provides that convenience.
Yeah. So let's talk about that more, in more layman's terms, in that, so for instance, a cookieless solution could be like a context provider. You mean?
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And there's, and we were talking about this in prep. From an innovation perspective, it seems like well, first of all, let's take a step back. How does this exactly work, right? So PMPs have been around forever. You set them up in some system in the back end, and it labels this URL or this audience ID, this user ID, and it goes out over the wire with the deal ID on the bid request. So what's the difference between that and what Curate does?
So the main difference is you don't have to be the owner operator of the supply to build a curated marketplace. And like the way you could think of it technically is that curators it doesn't work like a network where like the curator takes ownership of the media and then tries to resell it, or requires like a special integration with every individual seller and then puts the supply in their own member ID. And, we're not generating duplicative or additional bid requests. We're decorating the existing bid request that the seller the seller's just already generating. And if that targeting that the curator set up in their seat matches the requirements of the bid request, we just add another deal ID to the existing deal ID array that's going to the DSP. So there's no additional traffic for the DSPs to handle. And I think the other thing that's implied in that but maybe is not obvious, is there's still total media transparency to buyers. Like, curators can't obfuscate where the media is coming from, or like other stuff about the seller's bid request. Because if we did that, like, one, we want it to be transparent to buyers, but two, we also don't want to harm sellers and their ability to just continue to get, the bids that they were always going to be able to get. So hopefully that makes it like a little more clear. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems pretty innovative in that I can now, instead of having to integrate into a DSP, which is getting harder and harder all the time because there's a million integrations already, and the DSP, is like a trade desk, for instance, is saying, okay, well, you have to show us that you're going to be able to have a lot of sales in order for us to integrate. So there's a chicken and the egg thing there. And this seems to be a way for a new audience data company or contextual data company, or the new next whatever type of value additive programmatic vendor to be able to quickly integrate and be available within all the DSP marketplaces. Is that how you guys see it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the same thing when it comes to like identity challenges too, right? Like, it's a way for a data company to essentially get, scaled access to every buyer and every DSP with like one integration. And, like the other thing I think we've seen is, you've got, I just think most buyers are using multiple DSPs at this point, right? So you kind of have this challenge on the buyer side of, I'm trying to take more ownership of my supply chain. I'm trying to be more thoughtful where I spend, but it's actually like a real like tactical challenge for me to do that across many trading teams using many different buying side technologies at once. So the curated marketplace kind of solves this, go to market problem for a lot of, intermediaries, data companies, what have you. But it also solves a lot of like practical trader problems for buyers using many different DSPs. And, I don't know any buyer that just uses one DSP anymore, even though that's kind of been like, I think, the advice of most consultants and things to date.
Yeah. That's actually a great segue to the next sort of phase of our conversation, is that, today you're really representing more of the sell side inventory side of things. And I'm representing more of the buy side capabilities. And, those challenges that you were just talking about, we see as just one of many challenges that the buyers are having these days. Manual optimization is basically the way of the world at this point because of self-service tool sets that are required by most marketers. You're seeing that in almost all the major DSPs, the requirement for self-service and the requirement for manual trading. Now, each of the DSPs has different tool sets and different capabilities that help with certain tactics and things like that. But what we've seen is that anytime you click the auto optimize button on a performance campaign, you're never going to get the scaled results that you need. So it takes a lot of work to hit those KPIs. That's where we came at Curation, because for 6 years we've been running a managed service DSP, basically a specialized DSP that specializes in custom deep learning algorithms for every single client. But not everybody can use a managed service DSP. And we really always wanted to be what our tagline says, the brain behind the brands, right? So we wanted to be, because 6 years ago, we really thought that the pipes, the supply would be disaggregated from the brain. That's where actually going to the buy side of Xandr, if you remember, 6 years ago, AppNexus, now Xandr, had developed its Bonsai programmable bidder, and we were seeing sort of the rise of the programmable bidder. You needed a data science team to use it, and you couldn't bring your own features really easily and all these kinds of things. So that's where we built Cognitive 6 years ago, was the idea that we were going to become this brain that you didn't need a data science team for. We were going to take care of it all for you. We would plug into all the DSPs, including AppNexus Xandr at the time, and go from there and help manual traders auto-optimize their campaigns so that they had the time to handle all the campaigns they're re-giving. Because, a manual trader will have like 10 campaigns and they'll have time maybe for 2 of those. Have you seen, where do you see a lot of that coming in to the requests you're getting from, and sort of the other partners that you have on the customers, clients that are using Curate today?
Yeah, I think when, we've been talking, with Cognitive, it's a lot of the same driving factors, right? As we see with a lot of companies where, they've stood up this highly specialized service through either like a white label DSP or building their own DSP, but they've been really challenged by, buyers saying, I really want, I want to move my budgets to programmatic. I want to use my own DSP. Or even, one of the things we've seen, frankly, is like, buyers saying, I'm being mandated by my, corporation to use this DSP, and I need to like drive a certain amount of, spend through it to get commercial incentives. So it's just become like harder and harder, I think, for people to buy, services like yourself and many others who've traditionally run these independent trading desk style models, because the DSPs have, put so many more incentive structures in front of the buyers, and, the buyers want to be able to track and report everything in a single system. They've got BI systems hooked up to the log level data they're pulling through these things. Like, there's all kinds of reasons why, buyers, I think, are increasingly more tied to their DSP and, are less likely to buy through IOs. So that's like a really consistent line we hear from people. And, curated marketplaces, I think, are a great way to kind of take the same existing service that you can provide, but deliver it through a deal ID that someone can trade with whatever DSP they want, instead of having to buy through an IO. And, one of the things I wanted to ask you actually is, we see a lot of value in just completely migrating the model to be entirely deal. Of course we do, right? It benefits us. But I wonder, how you guys are thinking of it, and if you think there's still a window for like the managed service, like IO-based model. Do you think you'll run both side by side? Do you think, like, what's the difference and what's the payoff for a buyer? I've got my own idea, but it'd be interesting to know like how you sort of position both offerings, or if you're considering migrating entirely to just the curated marketplace model.
Yeah, the short answer for us is that we're always going to have both, but that's really a specialized answer because of what we do. So what Cognitive does is we take a client's first-party data. Let's say it's car companies, Ford versus GM, or insurance companies, Progressive versus Geico. People choose one or the other for some reason, and the people who are choosing Ford trucks versus GM trucks, there's got to be something different to them. We have to believe that. We have to believe the brand and what they stand for, and the differences in the capabilities of those, let's say trucks in this case, makes a difference. So what Cognitive does is it takes data from Ford, and then it would take data from GM and build totally different algorithms to try to find more people who are going to buy Ford, more people who are going to buy GM. We use deep learning to do that, which gives us this ability to deliver scalable performance results at a very large scale. We don't really have time to go into all that today, but the short of it is we can do with those deep learning algorithms very, very complicated things. We can do last touch attribution. We can, of course, do multi-touch attribution. We generally do not do last click attribution because frankly, it's even worse than last touch attribution for attribution from a scientific perspective. But really, we can do all those things, but a lot of the more advanced clients now are coming to us and saying, we want incrementality. Okay, we only want to spend on incremental lift. All of the big brands are feeling that, right? They're spending tons of money on television. So everyone knows the Progressive jingle, the Geico jingle, all those things. Everybody's generally knows Crest toothpaste versus Colgate toothpaste. And we all have generally made up our minds on those things. So spending more money to reach those people is a waste to a certain extent. It's not incremental. And so one of the big things that we do is we are able to, in our managed service DSP, run very controlled incrementality campaigns where the algorithms are learning in real time how to constantly optimize for incremental lift. And that is something that we have to always do in the managed service. It's not something that any of the other DSPs can do. They can run the incrementality test and give you the results. You have to figure out how to optimize that incrementality on a regular basis. But our algorithms are doing that in real time on automated, and they have to have a specialized sort of architecture to do that. So we'll always be running the incrementality there. There's always going to be other teams that really don't have the resources, nor should they need them to trade media and figure out how to optimize performance campaigns. So there's always going to be a need for managed service in our industry. And I think, every single DSP, regardless of them saying they're self-service or not, is running a sizable managed service business because of that.
So how are you thinking of going to market with this then? Like, are you thinking, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no.
Are you thinking like, the core optimization capabilities is the perfect thing delivered through a curated marketplace, but any kind of sophisticated, test control setup that's intended to measure incrementality is going to have to be measured, have to be run through managed service? Like, is it almost like a tiered based offering in your mind of like, hey, we think we'll start people off with, the core optimization capability and then, gradually upsell them to incrementality? Or you just come in through the door and you're going to be sort of going down one path or another? Or will it almost be more like campaign tactic? Like you're going to have your incrementality, campaign tactic run as a managed service. And there's 3 other things that we can help you optimize that we'll do through a curated marketplace.
Yeah, I think
how are you guys thinking
it's more
about
like that last piece. What we've always wanted to be was the brain behind the brand, right? We wanted to be an algorithm as a service company. And for some things, it has to be a managed service. For others, it can be wherever you want that to be. And that's really what we're excited about with Curate, Curate, is because it allows us to install that real-time algorithm where you're sending us an impression to take a look at. And then, like you say, decorate it with a deal ID if it's the right impression for a trader to buy to get that KPI they need from a performance perspective. We send that to you. You send that in real time into the DSP of choice that the trader's using, and they buy it. And that should auto-optimize at least that tactic, if not the entire campaign for them. So that allows them to optimize in their DSP of choice, or if they want a managed service, they can come through us. Generally speaking, most people are still buying last touch attribution performance campaigns. And so this gives us the opportunity to serve all of those people, which is a cool thing for a company who didn't want to be a DSP, became a DSP. But most DSPs that are managed service have a really hard time transitioning to self-service because it's now you have to compete against the trade desk. And we never really wanted to do that. We just wanted to be that smart algorithms for everybody.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to be a self-service DSP. Trade desk is really good at that, and others, and DV360 and all those things. We want to be able to bring you the algorithms. So Curate in this way, like we're talking about it from an innovation perspective, allows us to bring you the algorithms. So allows these real-time bidding algorithms to now be in any DSP, which is really cool.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think too. Like, do you think there are advantages that curated marketplaces have, aside from just being able to, like, okay, you trade it programmatically with your own DSP? Do you guys see other advantages of, going to market through a curated marketplace versus a managed service? Or, like, in your perfect world, would you just continue to sell everything through a managed service IO? It's been sort of interesting for us to sort of see, what other partners, end up, talking about when they're sort of like you, and they also, they want to maintain kind of both models. What they sort of say is, like, pros, cons for curated marketplace, pros, cons for,
right,
managed service IO.
Well, I'll say this, like we started off, we've been in the industry for 16 years now, and it's changed drastically since then. But the one constant is that people do things for not necessarily the most logical reasons in our industry, or there's a million different reasons, and two of them are really logical, and the others are because of some policy. I think we have, we've always had an industry where there were frameworks that aren't the most efficient or effective, but they're required because of things. Now, we're really coming out, in my opinion, we're coming out of a transparency crisis that we had that was really created a pretty significantly long time ago. I mean, the trade desk's rise has been based on this transparency crisis that was created because a lot of different players were running ad networks effectively with non-transparent fee structures, and just enabling a number of people to take advantage, let's say, of the buyer. And the buyer really got burned in that case. And so we swayed all the way over to the extreme of everything needs to be transparent. We have to understand every single impression being bought. But the reality, I think, that we've realized over the last few years is that it's unrealistic. It doesn't really work on a consistent basis. And we need better options to optimize performance campaigns than requiring manual trading, because performance is very science-based, and it's too hard to staff trading teams with lots of data scientists. It's just too hard. So I think we're coming back a little bit from the extreme of everything needs to be manually traded and fully transparent to, okay, if you can hit my KPIs, let's try the managed service again. So it's going to be interesting, I think, to see what happens in the next few years.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things we've really seen curated marketplaces help with too is, like, you mentioned transparency is kind of one of the big arcs over the last couple of years. I think the rise of video has also been one of the big arcs we've also seen, and really contributed to the rise of deal-based transactions. So, there's a couple things I think driving buyers moving more and more money to programmatic channels, more money to the deal-based channels within those programmatic channels. Some of that's the quality stuff. Some of that's the transparency stuff, wanting to have a bigger say in the supply chain decisions that their kind of DSP is subject to. But another element has been sort of, what you raised, like, hey, if I'm CBS, I have a lot of video content, and I'm only going to really sell that video content through a deal most likely. So one of the things we've seen some of the curators we work with get excited about is, if they were running kind of their own, managed business to date, it's actually been kind of hard for them to get access to that video supply, because you've got to have a relationship with the seller. And that's maybe not a big deal if you're a holdco, but it's kind of a big deal if you're a data company, because traditionally you haven't really worked with sellers. So, you've not been able to participate in the rise in, like, video buying as much as as much as buyers have. So I think another kind of key advantage we've seen is, a curated marketplace, because you can aggregate seller deals and get access to deal-based supply with sellers. It's sort of unlocking this new format for, folks like yourself. And I don't know if that's been a pain point for you, or if there's other things. But, like, we've seen it with sort of specialty format folks as well, where it's been so painful because their buyer has to go get a deal set up with a seller to run a skin or an interstitial or like these other kind of high impact formats. So, we think some of the other things that'll be really impactful at curated marketplaces is, access to deal gated supply for partners that never had relationships with sellers before.
Yeah. And that for us is one of the great selling points of Curate for us, because when we wanted to integrate with you guys, because look, we want all the inventory because we want our algorithms to be able to choose any impression at any time. And that's why we call the solution the new idea is dynamic PMP, because like I said in the past, a PMP is really an audience, a first-party audience on top of a publisher's own inventory, or a show in CTV that's hidden behind, a generic network name, or a premium inventory slot. But for us, we want to be able to decorate or label every impression, any impression that is going to lead to a conversion, right? So the deal IDs that we're giving through Curate to traders are constantly changing. They're not always this URL. They're not always this user. They're not always this time of day. Things are constantly changing and the algorithm's constantly evolving, so that deal ID will always be switching around which impression at what time of day with whom, and sometimes with what message to deliver at that time back to the trader. And so it's very, very dynamic. It's alive. It evolves just like the algorithm does. And that really, we can't do that without this Curate capability outside of our managed service DSP. And that
impossible for a trader to do this themselves, right? I mean, it's way too many updates.
Exactly. They have to. Right now, a trader is using maybe 30 tactics on a campaign because this little tactic gets you, 5% of where you need to go. This tactic gets you 10%, but the next week it gets you 1%, and you have to keep switching and keep finding new tactics. It's an almost impossible task at this point to do that for more than a handful of campaigns at a time, and we know that the traders are being given more than that to do. So it's a really cool new opportunity for, I think, everybody in the industry to bring these innovative solutions to traders without having to integrate with every DSP. All right, so we need to wrap up and get to questions. So, just to wrap up here, we've been talking about curated marketplaces. Ben, talked about the history of creating these things through another necessity at Xandr, but finding that it was the next stage, next evolution for a lot of different people to bring and decorate impressions through these deal IDs. And we at Cognitive see this as an opportunity to create a new type of PMP called a dynamic PMP, because we're able to, impression by impression now, label it for a trader and tell them whether they should buy it or not. Because at this point in time, in this instance, this ad exposure will deliver more conversions at scale than other strategies. So I think that's a great summary for us. And with that, let's hand it back over to Stuart and open up to questions.
Here we go. I should be back up on screen, and I hope you can hear me. We're going to move into some audience questions in just a moment. I know we've got this one slide up here on the future of curated marketplaces. I'm just going to advance this for a second here, Jeremy, because I know it's got the contact information here for you and for Ben, and I want to make sure that our audience sees that as we're transitioning here into the Q&A. What I would first off thank you both for a really interesting conversation. I know this is new and for a lot of people, so I'm sure we're going to have lots of audience questions coming in. I do want to invite our audience, if you have a question for our speakers today, just simply use the question tool you should see there on your screen. right now, probably underneath the video window where you're seeing me. So submit your questions. We can get to as many as we possibly can over the next 10 minutes or so. I just want to also let you know if we don't get to your question, we will certainly forward all the questions over to our sponsors. Two quick reminders for our audience. First off, our webinar today has been recorded. It will be available on demand. We're going to send you a link to that on-demand version later this afternoon, so keep your eyes out for that. Not a ton in the slides, but probably some things you might want to go back and reference. So if that's the case, we do have the PDF of the slides available. You can grab them right now in Event Resources. You should see that tab on your screen. Let's get into some of these questions, gentlemen. And Jeremy, I'm going to start this over to you, but as always, feel free to pass it off as that comes on. But when we're talking about putting this kind of curated marketplace in service, for a lot of people here, brands and agencies, I think they're wondering, like, what's the lift on something like this? Is this an execution? Is it going to take sort of a total repurposing of how they're doing things and the skills and all of this? Or is it something that's maybe just a more transitional as it goes on?
Yeah, so for us specifically, because we do custom algorithms, the way to train those algorithms is generally you would drop a pixel, just like any performance vendor would ask. You drop a conversion pixel, let's say. There's other ways to do it, but let's just use that as an example. You drop a conversion pixel, we gather conversion data on who is taking the actions you want more of, and then we take that to train an algorithm, and then that algorithm goes out and starts labeling these impressions with a deal ID. So very little lift. There's no special lift on a brand or an agency. They're used to dropping these pixels generally, and you're off to the races, and the deal ID will start coming in probably 2 to 3 weeks later. We coordinate with the traders on that. So it's pretty easy, but there's different ways of doing this. So I want to throw that over to Ben and tell him about how other people are using it.
There's just a huge range of use cases we've seen. It's sort of been surprising, but there's lots of different data companies that are, not exactly what Jeremy and Cognitive do exactly, but they have, unique proprietary data that's not otherwise available in the marketplace that folks want to bring to market. There's, some really interesting use cases with like rich media companies where, traditionally you've needed a seller deal. So there's a lot of weight to run a campaign, a lot of setup that you as a buyer are going to have to do kind of for every single time you want to run one of those creative executions. And now the rich media company can, essentially aggregate access with the sellers themselves and then provide a much more scalable solution, right off the shelf. There's a lot of agencies and holdcos that are using this to concentrate, seller deals and make supply-based decisions, and then federate those rules out to every DSP without every trader having to, have to be aware of like, well, what's the most optimal way to access CBS, right? Or like, do I have a preferred deal? Do I have priority? Do I have, whatever it is? There's even publisher consortiums that are using it to, sell as a single entity, bring their combined data to market. The list goes on.
Ben, another question here came in, and sort of trying to understand the benefits of a curated marketplace from the supply side, right, from the seller's point of view. What do they get out of this equation? Obviously, we talked a little bit about simplifying the buy, but question.
Yeah, we spent the whole time really talking about the benefit for the Jeremys of the world and the buyers of the world. We didn't really talk too much about how this works with the sell side. But, sellers also have, they get a lot out of this as well. And it really just comes down to increased demand, right? As like from the Xandr perspective, we want to partner with as many Jeremys as possible who are creating new and unique products and capabilities that add value to the marketplace. So every curator in a way is like, another team out there that's driving demand to a seller on the Xandr exchange. And we, just to be really clear, like we run a net bid auction for sellers. So, for Jeremy to win supply, he's got to be the highest bidding thing, net of all the fees and whatever whatever else, might be in the auction for him to win that supply. So it's adding incremental demand, premium demand for sellers, and bringing quality demand as well, right? Like you heard some of the advertisers or at least types of advertisers, that Cognitive's working with, and most curators are in the same boat, right? They're selling to, like, they have their own sales team. They're selling to agencies. Like those agencies bring high quality supply. It's not like local mom and pop shops. It's quality brands. So I think there's both a quality and just frankly increased, bigger number on your check at the end of the month reality for sellers.
Yeah. And Ben, when we think about the sell side on this, I mean, obviously there are very, very large sellers. We also know, right, as we are in cookie apocalypse or whatever we've been calling it on this webinar, that so much more control is going back onto the publisher side for this. Many fewer things, right, being bought on an open bid situation, a lot more on premium content. Is this sort of the solution as publishers of all sizes are doing much more of a premium execution?
Well, I think, any seller that has premium content or premium data, it's an interesting time in the industry right now, but I think there's so much more opportunity than risk for a lot of those sellers right now. I think the smaller sellers that traditionally made, the vast majority of their revenue through the open exchange, are perhaps, less well positioned. But that's, I think, also where Curation can help them, maybe to your point, because it's helping them identify new types of demand for their supply. So I'm hopeful that, like, Xandr Curate and really all curated marketplaces, frankly, are making it easier for buyers to transact with new types of identity solutions, whether it's publisher first-party data or other industry identifiers, or transact with really sophisticated, contextual or optimization-based services that maybe aren't, constrained by the cookie, and it's driving demand for them, through those mechanisms as well.
Got it. Jeremy, let's sort of send this one your way here, which is, how can digital marketers ultimately ensure that their agencies are really fully leveraging a curated marketplace? Right? Is there some sort of framework? Is there a checklist? Is there something that they can sort of use to inform that valuation?
Well, there's a number of things that are happening right now because of curated marketplaces. One, traditional PMPs have been very highly valued audiences or premium inventory slots. So I think you saw a lot of price them out of performance campaigns. And I think that this curated PMP is bringing the PMP back into performance marketing and programmatic trading. So that's one thing. I think that, brands should be asking their trading desks to be looking at all the innovations that are going to enable them to, at scale, get results. We know that custom algorithms delivered through these PMPs is one way to do that, because you can use it as a tactic, or you can use it on your entire budget. But all the other things are also, for better performance. We know that there's context vendors that are using this to label every impression with brand safety or context or things like that at a different pricing that may be even cheaper or more up to date in real time than what they're able to get from and integrated into their DSPs. So there's a lot of new innovation and opportunity here. And there's a lot of ability to put together a lot of different custom things across supply for the publishers also, because some of them are creating large first-party audience pools across multiple corporations, and that's going to enable us in a lot of different ways. So there's a ton of innovation in curated marketplaces. my suggestion is that every trading group needs to understand all of the options they have, because there are a lot of different ones, and they're not your grandma's PMP.
My grandma doesn't have a PMP. I don't know about I don't know where maybe your Thanksgiving was a little different. Jeremy and Ben, we are unfortunately at the end of our time here. I just want to thank you both again for a really interesting conversation as the two of you were sharing all these developments, and also for taking some time here to answer some audience questions. To our audience, I just want to let you know, if you submitted a question again, we didn't have a chance to get to it, I will forward them over to our sponsors for the opportunity for an offline response. Some just final reminders here for everyone. Again, if you want a copy of the slides, you're going to find them in event resources. Check your email, 3:30, 4 o'clock, you're getting that link to the on-demand version. So certainly feel free to share that link with your colleagues, have them engage with some of this content. And lastly, adweek.com/webinars, our webinar calendar. See what we've got coming up. End your year with some of the webinars we've got for the remainder of this year. Go back, check out that archive of on-demand webinars, see what you might want to pick up there. So again, let me thank our speakers today, Jeremy Fain from Cognitive, Ben Neen from Xander, and Cognitive as well for putting all of this together as our sponsor today. I want to thank our audience for taking time out of your busy day, and we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming AdWeek webinar. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.